My husband, Darius Vance, announced those words into the microphone at our wedding reception. He looked out at the hundreds of guests, a beaming, triumphant smile on his face. Then, he walked right past me, his wife of exactly 3 hours, and held out his hand to my younger sister, Simone. The entire ballroom erupted in applause. They thought it was a sweet, unconventional gesture. They didn't see the truth. But then, I stood up. In my white wedding gown, I walked across the dance floor, past the cheering crowd, straight to the head table where my father sat like a king holding court. The music seemed to fade into the background as I stopped in front of him. I took a breath, and I asked one loud question. A question that made my husband choke on his champagne, sent my sister into shock, and shattered my family forever. Hello, everyone. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you believe that the truth always comes out, hit that like button and subscribe. Enjoy the story. But before that moment, before that question was even uttered, there was the party. The biggest, loudest, most lavish celebration our city had ever seen. The Grand Magnolia Ballroom buzzed like a disturbed hive. Hundreds of guests, the entire business and social elite of our thriving mid-sized city, ate, drank, and laughed. The string orchestra played something light and non-intrusive, a delicate backdrop to the clinking of crystal and the murmur of conversation. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. Servers in crisp white jackets glided silently between the tables, delivering champagne and endless trays of hors d'oeuvres. I sat at the main table, in the bride's spot, in my flawless white gown that cost more than some cars. I felt like an exhibit in a museum, a very expensive, very quiet exhibit. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, nodded at the right times, and accepted congratulations from people I barely knew. "You look beautiful, Nia. Such a handsome couple. Your father must be so proud." I heard it all, but a dull, inexplicable dread was building inside me. It sat heavy in my stomach, a cold stone swallowed whole. My husband, Darius Vance, was magnificent. There was no other word for it. Tall, charming, with a jawline that could cut glass, dressed in a designer tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He was the life of the party. He moved easily from table to table, shaking men's hands with a firm grip, kissing the ladies' cheeks with just the right amount of charm. His infectious laugh echoed across the floor, drawing everyone's attention. He was the ideal son-in-law for my father, Elijah Hayes. Darius was ambitious, sharp, from a good family that had recently fallen on hard times. He was hungry, and my father loved hungry people. He was the perfect husband for me, Nia, the reliable, serious elder daughter who had spent her entire life doing exactly what was expected of her. I was the head of quality control at my father's food processing empire. I was the good one. I looked at my father, Elijah Hayes. Silver-haired and authoritative, he sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne. He surveyed the room with a look of deep satisfaction. Everything was going according to his plan. His business empire, built on food processing and distribution, was now cemented by this strategic corporate merger. He occasionally cast approving glances at me, and those glances made me uneasy. It wasn't love in his eyes. It was the look a man gives a valuable asset he has just successfully leveraged. Next to my father sat my younger sister, Simone. Bright, capricious, and always the center of attention. Today, she wore a tight, wine-red maid-of-honor dress that seemed designed to draw every eye. Simone was bored. She listlessly poked at her dessert with a silver fork and shot sultry, lingering glances at Darius whenever he was nearby. I was used to those glances. Simone always looked that way at everything that belonged to me. First my toys, then my friends, and now, apparently, my husband. But Darius, it seemed, paid her no mind, at least not today. He was too busy being the perfect groom. The MC for the evening, a smooth-talking professional especially flown in from Los Angeles, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. A toast from the groom." The guests quieted down, turning toward the center of the room. Darius walked to the microphone, taking it with an easy confidence. He surveyed the room with that beaming smile that, however, did not linger on me. "My dear friends, "My dearest family," he began, his smooth baritone filling the hall, commanding attention. "I am the happiest man alive. Today, I have not just married a wonderful woman. I have joined my life with the Hayes family, a family I have known and respected for 10 years. 10 long years." He paused, and there was something theatrical, something rehearsed about that silence. It felt calculated. "A lot has happened over these years," he continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more intimate. "But all this time, one secret, one great love has lived in my heart." The guests hummed approvingly. "Ah," someone murmured, "how romantic." I felt a cold knot tighten in my throat. I had known Darius for exactly 10 years. He came to our factory as a young logistics specialist right out of college, but I remembered no secret love. Our relationship had begun just 1 year ago. It was swift, practical, and frankly, professional. My father introduced him as a promising young executive. We went to dinner, and things took off from there. There was no decade-long romance. "And I believe that today," Darius said, raising his voice slightly. "On this most important day, I must finally be honest with all of you, and with myself." He looked toward the head table, but not at me. His gaze went past me, fixed intently on Simone. "This dance, this first dance in my new life, is for the one I've secretly loved all these 10 years. My heart skipped a beat. What was this? Some idiotic joke? A prank? Was he going to pull my mother up for a dance? The orchestra struck up a slow, tender melody. Darius, still holding the microphone, began to walk toward the main table. He was coming straight for us. I began to rise from my seat, tangling myself slightly in the heavy folds of my wedding dress, ready to accept his hand for our first dance. A smile, confused but ready, formed on my lips. But he walked past. He did not even glance at me. He passed just 3 feet from my chair, leaving a trail of expensive cologne and icy humiliation in his wake. He approached Simone. Simone blossomed. There wasn't a shadow of surprise on her face, only triumph. Pure, unadulterated triumph. She rose gracefully, extended her hand, and he led her to the center of the floor. The world narrowed down to that one spot for me. My husband was twirling my sister in a romantic dance, looking into her eyes with a passion I had never seen him direct at me. And at that moment, the worst thing happened. The guests started applauding. Tentatively at first, confused, then louder and louder. They didn't understand. They decided it was some grand, eccentric gesture, a touching family tradition they didn't know about. "Oh, how sweet!" "What a surprise!" "So touching, a dance with the maid of honor." The comments echoed from every side. The applause hammered in my ears like a funeral march for my life. I sat in my white gown under that golden light and felt myself shattering into a million pieces. I saw my father's smiling face, applauding too, approving this farce. I saw Darius's back and Simone's happy face resting on his shoulder. I was superfluous at this celebration. I was merely a function, a placeholder, a shield for something else entirely. I wanted to scream, to run away, to tear the dress off my body and break down right here in front of hundreds of eyes. But instead, something inside me clicked. Something cold, hard, and sharp as ice. It was clarity. I remembered a conversation with my father 2 months ago in his study. The air was thick with cigar smoke. His words were harsh, an ultimatum delivered with the weight of his entire empire behind it. "You will marry Vance," he had said, not looking up from his papers. "It is non-negotiable. He has to become part of the family. He has a debt hanging over his head that could sink both him and us if it surfaces the wrong way. You are the guarantee, Nia. You are the cement for this deal." Back then, I didn't argue. I had always been the obedient daughter. I thought I was helping the family business. But now everything had changed. The deal was done. The papers were signed. I had fulfilled my part. And they? They had simply thrown me away, used me and discarded me in the most public way possible. The tears dried before they even began. I slowly, very slowly, placed my glass of champagne on the table. It made a small clink that only I heard. I took another full glass from a passing waiter's tray, and I stood up. The ringing in my ears muffled the music and the applause. I saw only one target, my father. I walked toward him. Every step was an effort, as if I were wading through thick, freezing water. My voluminous dress snagged on the legs of chairs. Guests stepped aside, looking bewildered at the bride who had abandoned her seat and was walking away from the dance floor. The music was still playing. Darius and Simone were still dancing, oblivious to everything around them, lost in their own little world. I reached the head table, stopping directly in front of my father. He stopped applauding and looked up at me with cold annoyance, as if to say, "What do you want? Don't interrupt this moment." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of expensive flowers and betrayal, and I asked the question. I did not yell, I did not cry. I spoke loudly and clearly, so everyone in the room heard me in the sudden silence, because the music abruptly cut off mid-note. "Father," my voice was even and cold as steel. "Since Darius just confessed his love for Simone, does this mean you're forgiving the $750,000 debt that you forced me to marry him to cover?" Time stopped. The applause died as abruptly as if it had been cut off with a knife. Someone dropped a fork, and the clatter of metal on the china plate seemed deafening in the vast hall. An absolute deadly silence fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on me, on my father, and on the dancing couple, who were now frozen in the center of the floor. Darius choked. He coughed so violently he doubled over, clutching his chest. The champagne he had drunk before his toast caught in his throat, burning. His face flushed a deep red. Simone pulled away from him as if he were on fire. Her eyes were wide with horror. She looked at me, then at her father, then at the guests. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, admiring just a minute ago, now drilled into her like augers. A public exposure. Not just the exposure of an affair, but the exposure that this entire wedding, this entire fairy tale, had been a commodity in a dirty financial deal. Her face went as white as the tablecloth. She began to gasp for air. Her chest heaved spasmodically. I, she croaked, clutching her throat. And suddenly her legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor in a heap of wine-red silk, like a cut flower. Panic erupted. Someone screamed. Guests scrambled from their seats, knocking over chairs. My father jumped up, overturning the table, champagne glasses shattering on the floor. "A doctor! Call an ambulance immediately!" he yelled, rushing towards Simone, pushing people out of his way. Darius, still coughing, rushed over too, his face a mask of terror. The hall dissolved into chaos, a blur of motion and noise. Someone was on the phone with emergency services. Others were kneeling around Simone, trying to revive her. I stood in the same spot, clutching the still full glass of champagne. I watched the pandemonium I had caused, feeling neither schadenfreude nor satisfaction, only a vast, echoing emptiness. 10 minutes later, medics arrived. They swiftly and professionally loaded Simone onto a stretcher. She was still unconscious, her face pale against the red dress. As they carried her past me, one of the paramedics gave me a swift, judgmental glance, as if I were the one who had wielded a weapon. The stretcher was wheeled out of the room. Darius bolted after them, not looking back. At that moment, I looked at my father. I expected anything, a scream, an accusation, maybe even a physical blow right there in front of everyone. But a small, pathetic part of me was still looking for even a drop of support in his eyes. I was still his daughter. Elijah straightened up from where he had been kneeling. He turned to me, his face purple with suppressed rage. He stepped right up to me, invading my space. His eyes were glacial, devoid of any warmth. He seized my arm above the elbow, his fingers digging into my skin through the silk of my dress like claws. "You foolish girl," he hissed, so quietly that no one but me could hear. Hatred rang in his voice, pure and undiluted. "You didn't expose him. You just destroyed this family." He flung my arm away with disgust, turned on his heel, and strode quickly toward the exit, following the ambulance without looking back once. I was left alone in the middle of a ruined celebration, in my pristine white wedding dress, which now felt like a shroud. Guests watched me from the edges of the room with judgment, fear, and morbid curiosity. I was the center of attention, but I had never felt more isolated in my life. The family had just passed judgment on me, and the verdict was guilty. I remained standing there. The guests, seized by a wave of awkwardness, quickly offered hurried farewells to each other and dispersed, careful not to meet my gaze as they hurried toward the exits. The Grand Magnolia Ballroom, full of laughter and music just 10 minutes ago, rapidly emptied, leaving only the debris of a celebration that never really happened. Servers silently cleared the nearly untouched food from the tables, their eyes averted. The party was dead. I set the glass down on a nearby table. My hands were steady now. Everything inside me was burned to ash. Only cold, ringing cinders remained. I had to do something. Go somewhere. After the official part, the family and closest friends always gathered in the smaller banquet room for a private celebration. I was family. At least, I thought I was until this evening. Gathering the hem of the heavy, now alien-feeling dress, I walked toward the inconspicuous door at the end of the corridor that led to the private suite. Marcus, the head of security, whom I had known for years, blocked my path. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed elsewhere on the richly decorated wall. "Ms. Hayes, you can't go in there." His words were quiet, almost apologetic, but firm. "What do you mean I can't, Marcus?" My voice was even, devoid of emotion. "My family is in there." Mr. Hayes gave the order. He finally met my eyes, which held a mixture of pity and fear. "Said you weren't to be admitted, under any circumstances." It was the first blow, direct, without pretense. I had been erased. I was no longer part of the inner circle. I nodded slowly, unwilling to show him my humiliation. I turned and walked toward the main exit. The coat check attendant silently handed me a light coat, which I draped over my shoulders on top of my wedding dress. Outside, the cool night air hit me, a sharp contrast to the heated atmosphere inside. I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, curiously studying the bride without a groom in his rearview mirror. I gave the address of the new luxury condo my father had gifted Darius and me for the wedding, our love nest, my new home. The ride through the city at night was surreal, glowing storefronts, sparse pedestrians, the rhythmic changing of traffic lights. It all seemed like scenes from someone else's movie, viewed through thick glass. The cab stopped at the new exclusive high-rise. The concierge, greeting me politely but with a flicker of surprise, opened the door. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse floor, walked to the door of apartment number 77, and put my key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, pushing harder, then again, jiggling it. Useless. The key didn't fit. I checked the number, apartment 77. This was it. The lock had been changed. In the time it took me to get there, less than an hour, someone had already arrived and replaced the lock. Darius, or my father's people. So fast, so mercilessly efficient. I rested my forehead against the cold metal door. Behind that door were my things, my clothes, my books, my jewelry, a part of my life to which access had just been cut off. The phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. The name Father flashed on the screen. I answered, my voice tight. "Hello, where are you?" My father's voice was icy, businesslike, devoid of any emotion. "At the door of my apartment, which I can't get into." "That is no longer your apartment," he said, stating a fact, "or your job. As of tomorrow, you are fired from the factory for gross misconduct and creating a public scandal that damaged the company's and the family's reputation." I stood there, stunned into silence. "Your bank accounts are frozen," he continued, dictating the terms of my exile. "All of them were tied to corporate accounts, so don't try to withdraw a penny. That's all. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. He had hung up. The banishment was complete and final. No job, no money, no home, no family. I slowly sank to the floor in the empty, well-lit hallway, leaning my back against the wall next to the door that was no longer mine. The wedding dress spread around me like a white cloud on the plush carpet. I needed to call someone. There had to be someone. I found the number for Mr. Sterling, my father's longtime business partner and friend. He had known me since childhood, always calling me sweetheart and bringing me gifts. He answered after the third ring. "Hello?" Mr. Sterling, it's Nia Hayes. A heavy, awkward pause hung on the other end. Nia, I'm very busy right now, he quickly stammered, his voice tight. Can't talk, sorry. And he hung up without letting me finish, without asking what was wrong. I felt the first tear roll down my cheek, hot and fast. I wiped it away angrily with the back of my hand. Can't fall apart now. I dialed another number. Mrs. Dubois, my late mother's best friend, who hugged me at every meeting and told me how much I resembled my mother. Yes, sweetie? Her voice sounded worried. The rumors must have already spread through the city like wildfire. Mrs. Dubois, hello. I'm in trouble. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. Could I? The line suddenly cut off. I looked at the screen. Call ended. I called back. The subscriber is unavailable. She had blocked me. That was it. My entire world, so stable and predictable just hours ago, had ceased to exist. I was a pariah, a radioactive asset that everyone was rushing to discard before they got contaminated. I stood up. I had to go. I couldn't stay here in the hallway. But where? Then, an image surfaced in my memory. An old house on the outskirts of the city, overgrown with wild ivy and nestled behind tall trees. A house my father had strictly forbidden me to ever visit. The home of my Aunt Vivian, my father's older sister, with whom he hadn't spoken in 20 years. She is poison to this family. Forget she exists, he had told me once when I was a teenager, his voice filled with a strange, deep anger. Now, that poison was my only hope. I went outside. It had begun to rain, a fine, cold, unpleasant drizzle that soaked everything. It immediately began to seep through the thin fabric of my coat and the heavy silk of my wedding dress. I walked. I had no money for a cab, and the thought of asking a driver for a free ride was beyond my dignity. I walked across the entire city. My wedding attire turned into a soggy, dirty mess, heavy with water and mud. My heels clicked monotonously on the wet asphalt. People, the few pedestrians out at this hour, shied away from the strange figure of the bride trudging alone in the rain, giving me wide berths. My makeup ran, leaving dark streaks on my cheeks like war paint. An hour later, soaked to the bone and shivering, I reached the location. It was an old but sturdy brick house, set back from the road in an overgrown yard. Lights were on warm in the windows. I approached the heavy wooden door and knocked. My hand was shaking. The door was opened by a tall, thin woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Vivian. She strongly resembled my father, the same sharp features, the same posture, but her eyes looked different. Not commanding, but penetrating, as if they saw right through a person to their core. She looked at me, at my wet, ruined dress, at my smeared mascara, at my shivering form. No surprise or pity registered on her face, just a calm acknowledgement. I was waiting for one of Elijah's children to finally see the truth, she said in a steady, calm voice. Come in, you'll catch cold. Inside, the house was simple but cozy. It smelled of dried herbs, old books, and wood smoke. Vivian gave me a large, soft towel and an old but warm bathrobe. While I changed in the bathroom, peeling off the sodden wedding dress, Vivian brewed tea. We sat in the kitchen. I silently drank the hot, sweet tea, trying to stop shivering. So, he threw you out. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Vivian looked at me with her clear, cool eyes. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He said, I destroyed the family, because of some debt Darius had. Vivian gave a bitter, short laugh. Poor, naive girl. You still think this is about Darius? I looked up at her, confused. Who else? Father said Vance had a $750,000 debt, and that this marriage was a way to tie him down, force him to work for the family to pay back every penny. Elijah always knew how to spin a good lie, Vivian cut in, her voice sharp. She leaned across the table toward me. The debt was indeed $750,000, only it wasn't Darius's debt. She paused, letting the words sink in. It was Simone's debt, your little sister's. I gasped for breath. The air left the room. What? How? Very simple, Vivian continued mercilessly. For the last few years, your sister has been living a double life. While you were working at the factory, controlling product quality and being the good daughter, she was flying out to Miami and Vegas. Luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, designer clothes, parties. She always wanted a lifestyle beyond her means. She borrowed money from shady lenders at insane interest rates. I listened, stunned. When the debt climbed to $750,000 and the creditors threatened to come to Elijah, he flew into a rage. But Simone, she's his darling, his favorite. He couldn't let a scandal touch her precious name. Vivian leaned back in her chair, watching me. And then Darius came along, ambitious, handsome, from a good family but broke. The perfect candidate. Elijah offered him a deal. He pays off Simone's debt, makes it disappear, and Darius gets married. But not to Simone. No, Simone had to stay clean, untouched by this mess. He had to marry you, the reliable, obedient Nia, who never asks too many questions. That way, he tied Darius to the family, making him beholden forever. She paused, her eyes boring into mine. And you were the payment in the deal, the collateral, the sacrificial lamb. The world had just turned over again. The betrayal was deeper, uglier, and more calculated than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just a humiliated bride. I was a bargaining chip in a complex operation to save my sister's reputation and cover up her mess. I sat with my head bowed. I didn't have the strength even for anger, only a dull, all-consuming ache that seeped into my bones. What am I supposed to do now? I whispered to the empty teacup. Vivian was silent for a moment, watching me intently. Then she stood up, walked to an old dresser in the corner, and took something small from a drawer. She returned and placed an old, tarnished brass key on a simple string in front of me. For starters, stop seeing yourself as a victim. Your mother was not a fool, Nia. She saw your father and sister for who they were years ago. She left you tools. I stared at the old key lying on the kitchen table. It looked heavy. A real key, the kind they didn't make anymore. Tools? My aunt's word echoed in my head. I picked up the key, and the cold metal seemed to pass on a piece of its hardness to me. What is this key for? I asked, looking up at Vivian. A small studio apartment in an old district near the river bend, Vivian answered, collecting the teacups. Your mother bought it long before she died, kept it a secret from Elijah. She called it her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe and think without his constant control. He never found out about it. After her death, I kept paying the bills and taxes so the apartment wouldn't be taken. I knew it might be needed one day. I spent the night at my aunt's in a small guest room. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the last 24 hours. Humiliation, banishment, total betrayal. And now, this secret left by my mother. In the morning, Vivian gave me a little cash for the time being and some simple clothes, dark slacks and a gray sweater that once belonged to her daughter. Changing out of her aunt's bathrobe, I felt a semblance of composure return for the first time in hours. The wedding dress, dirty and crumpled, lay in a shapeless heap in the corner. I wrote down the address for you, Vivian said as I left. Go, Nia, and remember, your mother was the strongest person I ever knew, far stronger than your father. Find what she left you. I had to take the bus. I sat by the window, watching the city pass by, a city that was no longer mine. There was the bakery where my father and I ate ice cream when I was little. There was the theater where Darius took me on our first date. And there was the massive gray building of our factory, Hayes Family Foods, where I had worked for the last 15 years. All of it was now part of someone else's life, a life I was locked out of. The house near Riverbend turned out to be an ordinary, worn-down 3-story brick walk-up. No concierge, no shining lobbies. It smelled of damp earth and the river. I climbed the creaking staircase to the 3rd floor and found door number 24. My heart hammered against my ribs. I inserted the old key into the lock. It turned with a loud, rusty screech that echoed in the hallway. The door opened and I stepped into the past. The apartment was tiny but perfectly clean. The air was stale, smelling of dust and time. Simple furniture, a sofa bed, an armchair, a writing desk by the window, a small kitchen behind a faded curtain. Everything was in its place, covered by a fine layer of dust. It was as if the owner had just stepped out and would return any minute. On the wall hung a tear-off calendar, frozen on a date from 10 years ago, the day my mother died. I slowly walked around the room, running my hand across the desk, leaving a trail in the dust. What was I looking for? What tools? I opened the closet. A few of my mother's simple dresses hung there, her old coat. Stacks of books lined the shelves. Nothing unusual. My gaze fell on the writing desk. It was empty except for an old desk lamp. I pulled the drawers. The top two were unlocked. Inside were stacks of clean paper, pens, paper clips, everything expected from a person who valued order. But the bottom drawer was locked. I took out the key Vivian had given me. It didn't fit. It was too big. I tried turning it this way and that, but it was no use. Disappointment swelled in my throat. Had it all been for nothing? I sat in the chair and looked around, desperate. My gaze fell once more on the calendar. 10 years. It had been waiting for 10 years. I walked up to it, touched the yellowed leaf, and suddenly noticed a tiny scratch on the wall behind it, as if something had been hidden there. I carefully peeled back the corner of the calendar. Taped to the wall, almost invisible, was a small key. A cabinet lock key secured with a piece of yellowed Scotch tape. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled the tape off and inserted the tiny key into the lock of the bottom drawer. It clicked. I pulled the drawer open. Inside lay one single item, a thick ledger with a hard, dark green cover. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. It wasn't a diary. The first page, written in my mother's neat, tiny handwriting, read, "Inconsistency Log, Production Bay 2. I began to flip through the pages, a chill creeping over me with every turn. It was a meticulous, detailed record of all production anomalies during the last 2 years of my mother's life. Dates, batch numbers, product names, and 2 columns. Official reason for disposal, and actual fate of the goods. A record from March 15th. Product, premium beef stew, batch number 481. Disposed, 800 cans. Official reason, seal integrity breach during transport. Actual fate, sold via A.V. Johnson, cash payment, some delivered to E.P. Hayes. A record from April 29th. Product, condensed milk, batch number 512. Disposed, 1,200 cans. Official reason, manufacturing defect. Fat content non-compliant with standard. Actual fate, sold at City Market, cash payment, some delivered to E.P. Hayes. Page after page, dozens of entries, hundreds of thousands of units of product that were logged as defect, spoilage, or breakage, but were actually sold on the side for cash. This was an entire underground business empire operating parallel to the official one. My father had been stealing from his own company for years. He was running a black market operation out of his own warehouses, and I, as the head of quality control, hadn't seen anything, or hadn't wanted to. I had believed the documents he supplied me. I had trusted him. I closed the book. This was the tool. Not just proof of theft, but a weapon. A nuclear weapon against his reputation and his freedom. But I didn't know how to use it. These entries were just numbers on a page. I needed someone who could confirm how these massive batches of disposed goods could quietly leave the warehouses without anyone noticing. I needed someone from the inside. And I remembered Calvin. Mr. Calvin Jasper, the stern, taciturn warehouse foreman who had worked at the factory since before I was born. He was the only one in the planning meetings who dared to argue with my father, for which my father hated him and constantly threatened to fire him. But he didn't fire him because no one knew the warehouse operations better than Calvin. And most importantly, Calvin deeply respected my mother. He often told me, "Your mother was a woman of conscience, Nia." I found his number in an old contact book on my phone. I called. Calvin didn't answer right away. It rang 5 times. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded tired and guarded. "Hello? Who is this?" "Mr. Jasper, it's Nia Hayes." "Nia." He paused for a long time. "I heard what happened at the wedding. My condolences." "I need your help, Calvin," I said quickly, skipping the pleasantries. "It's vital, and it concerns my mother." The mention of my mother worked. "What is it?" "I can't talk on the phone. I have something to show you. Let's meet somewhere where we won't be seen." He paused, considering. "Okay, in 1 hour, at the old bus depot by platform 7. It's crowded there." The bus depot was a noisy, bustling place, perfect for blending into the crowd. I arrived early, sat on a scarred wooden bench, tightly clutching the bag containing the ledger. I felt a mix of fear and hope. Calvin was my only chance to validate this evidence. He appeared exactly at the appointed time, but it wasn't the Calvin I knew, the confident, grumpy foreman. He looked frightened. His eyes darted around, checking the faces of passers-by. He kept looking over his shoulder. He walked up to me but didn't sit down. "Talk fast," he snapped, not looking at me. "What is this about?" "Mr. Jasper, I found some of my mother's records," I began, opening my bag just enough for him to see the green cover. "They prove that Father has been selling products off the books for years, faking disposals. Here, look at these entries." I reached to pull out the book, but he recoiled from me as if I were holding a poisonous snake. "No, don't," he muttered, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. "Put it away. I can't see that." "What do you mean you can't?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Calvin, this is our chance to fix everything, to restore justice for my mother's memory. You respected her." He finally looked me in the eyes, and his gaze was one of desperate pleading and shame. "I can't, Nia." His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Why not?" "Mr. Elijah Hayes, he just promoted me." I froze. "Promoted you?" "I'm the new head of quality control," he said, every word clearly difficult to utter. "I took your old spot, with 3 times the salary and a full benefits package." He looked down at his shoes. "My wife is sick, Nia. We need the insurance. I have grandkids going to college. I can't lose this job. I'm sorry." He turned and walked away without looking back, quickly dissolving into the crowd of passengers rushing for their buses. I remained sitting on the bench, alone amidst the noise and commotion of strangers' lives. My last hope had just walked away, bought and paid for with my own job. I didn't move. Buses arrived and departed, spewing diesel fumes. People hurried and bustled, but I sat motionless, clutching the bag with my now useless treasure. Calvin's betrayal was worse than my father's blow. My father was an enemy. Anything could be expected of him. But Calvin? He was the last thread connecting me to the past, to the memory of my mother, to the belief that decency still existed in that factory. And that thread had just been cut, bought for 30 pieces of silver. I didn't know how long I sat there. I only snapped out of it when a police patrol car stopped nearby and flashed its lights. A young sergeant rolled down the window and looked at me sympathetically. "Ma'am, are you all right? You've been sitting here for 2 hours without moving. Are you waiting for someone?" "I'm fine," I replied dully, standing up, my legs stiff. "I was just waiting. I'm leaving now." The walk back to Vivian's house seemed even longer than the night before. My legs felt like lead, and my head was foggy. I returned to the old house on the outskirts like a beaten dog. Vivian met me at the doorstep. She didn't ask anything. She understood everything from my face. She silently led me to the kitchen and poured another cup of strong tea. I told her everything about Calvin's terrified eyes, about his promotion, about the salary bump. I expected my aunt to be disappointed, to give up, but Vivian merely pressed her lips into a thin, hard line. "I knew it," she said, cold anger ringing in her voice. "That's his method. Elijah doesn't just punish his enemies, he buys his friends. He finds a person's weak spot, a sick wife, a mortgage, the fear of poverty, and he presses on it until they break. Calvin isn't a traitor, Nia. He's just another one of Elijah's victims, another soul he's purchased." "But what am I supposed to do now?" Desperation surfaced in my voice. "Without testimony from the inside, that ledger is just a piece of paper. No one will believe it's real." Vivian stood up and walked to the window, clasping her hands behind her back, looking out at the dark garden. "If you can't get in through the door, Nia," she said slowly, "you have to look for a window. There's one more person in this city who hates your father as much as I do, maybe more." "Who is it?" "His name is Andre Thorne," Vivian said, turning back to me. He used to be the best investigative journalist in our state, sharp, aggressive, afraid of nothing. 5 years ago, he started digging into one of Elijah's deals involving product supply to state school systems. He thought Elijah was cutting corners. What happened? He got too close, and your father destroyed him. How? Did he threaten him? Vivian scoffed. Threats would have been too simple. Elijah set things up to make it look like Andre himself was taking bribes to kill exposé articles. Phony witnesses, fabricated bank records, doctored audio recordings. Andre was fired in disgrace. The managing editor of his newspaper, his best friend, publicly disavowed him. Everyone turned their back on him. Elijah didn't just break his career. He destroyed his name, his reputation. He ground him into the dirt. I listened, and a faint hope sparked within me. A man with nothing left to lose might be exactly what I needed. Where can I find him? I'm afraid he's not in a good place right now, Vivian said sadly. The last I heard, he's writing cheap ad copy for some little outfit called Creative Plus. It's in the basement of an old business center downtown. Finding Creative Plus wasn't hard. A faded plastic sign hung above a steep, concrete stairwell leading to a basement. I descended into the gloom. The sharp smell of cheap tobacco, instant coffee, and stale air hit my nose. In a small, windowless room, cluttered with papers and empty coffee cups, a man in his 40s sat behind an old computer monitor. He was thin, with dark circles under his eyes and 3 days of stubble. An overflowing ashtray sat on the desk in front of him. "What do you need?" he asked, without looking up from the screen, his voice raspy. "Car wash slogans are on sale today. Buy 2, get 1 free. I need Andre Thorne." "Well, you've found him," he mumbled. He finally looked away from the screen. His eyes were tired, cynical, and dead. "To what do I owe the visit of a respectable lady to my crypt?" I walked closer to the desk and placed my mother's ledger on it. "My name is Nia Hayes, and I need your help." "Hayes?" he chuckled, a dry, hacking sound. "The daughter of the great Elijah Hayes. Are you having a family dispute over allowance?" "Sorry, princess, I'm not interested. I don't dig through other people's dirty laundry anymore, especially not the Hayes families. Once was enough for me." He demonstratively turned back to his computer and started typing. "I know what he did to you," I said firmly to his back, "and I have proof that he was defrauding his own factory for years, stealing millions." Andre turned back to me slowly. A flicker of interest crossed his eyes but quickly vanished, replaced by wariness. "Proof?" He scoffed skeptically, but nevertheless, he reached out and picked up the ledger. He lazily flipped through a few pages. "Need handwriting, numbers, dates, disposition. So what? What does this prove? That your dad didn't pay taxes on part of his profit? Minor tax fraud. Every other businessman in this city does it. In court, he'll say it's a forgery. That a resentful daughter is seeking revenge because daddy cut her off. No prosecutor will touch a case like this against Elijah Hayes. Go home, Miss Hayes. Don't waste my time or yours." He pushed the book away across the desk. I felt the floor drop out from under me again. Was he going to refuse too? Was everyone afraid of my father? Desperation gave me strength. I leaned over the desk. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just theft." I grabbed the book, frantically turning pages to the ones I had memorized. "There's a system here. Look at the dates." I jabbed my finger at a few consecutive entries. "Here, October 28th. That was the last Friday of the month. Here, November 25th, the last Friday. December 30th, also the last Friday." They were disposing of huge batches of goods, thousands of units, on the same day every month. That can't be a coincidence. Andre froze. He looked at the book, then at me. He picked up the ledger again, this time with a different, more focused movement. He looked closely at the dates I pointed out. The cynical mask on his face began to crack. He flipped through a few more pages, his eyes scanning the lines quickly, looking for the pattern. "The last Friday of every month," he muttered to himself. A spark ignited in his dull eyes, that same spark of excitement, of the hunt, that Elijah Hayes had tried to extinguish 5 years ago. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it hit the wall. "Wait here." He walked to a huge, battered metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He fumbled with a massive ring of keys for a long time, cursing under his breath, and finally opened it with a loud screech. The cabinet was crammed with old, dusty files and stacks of yellowed newspapers. This was his private archive, everything that remained of his past life as a real journalist. He pulled out several thick folders labeled City News from different years and dumped them onto the desk, scattering ash from the ashtray. Dust billowed into the air. He started working quickly, focused like a surgeon. He opened the ledger to the first date I mentioned, October 28th from 10 years ago, and began sifting through the newspapers from that month. Okay, October, 10 years ago, last Friday, he mumbled, his fingers flying over the pages. Here it is. He spread out a newspaper on the desk and showed me. There was a photo on the front page. A smiling Elijah Hayes, looking 10 years younger, shaking hands with the director of the city children's home. And under the photo, a huge headline. Generous donation from Hayes Family Foods. The article read, "The children's home received a shipment of 800 cans of premium beef stew and condensed milk today, courtesy of Mr. Elijah Hayes." I gasped. I looked at the ledger. The date matched. The products matched. The quantities matched. Only in the ledger they were listed as defect, seal integrity breach, and sold via A.V. Johnson. Next date, Andre said feverishly. He no longer looked like a burned-out ad writer. He was a bloodhound picking up a scent. November. He found another paper, another article. Help for veterans. Elijah Hayes donated food baskets to the City Veterans Council. The list of goods matched the disposed items in the ledger for that month. December. Another paper. Holiday Miracle. School Intermediate Number 3 thanks the Hayes family for holiday gifts of canned goods. Again, it matched the manufacturing defect entry, and every time in my mother's ledger, these same products were recorded as spoiled, non-compliant, and disposed of for cash. Andre leaned back in his chair and looked at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "My God," he whispered. These weren't disposed goods, and he wasn't just selling them on the black market. He ran a hand through his greasy hair. This was charity. He was donating them. He got public recognition, awards, and huge tax write-offs for them for years. He was the city's great benefactor. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. But he was actually donating spoiled goods. He was feeding orphans and the elderly what should have gone to the dump. Stuff with broken seals, bad fat content, stuff that could make people sick. Now, this was no longer just fraud. This was monstrous. It was a cynical, dangerous game played with the health of the city's most vulnerable people, all for profit and glory. "I'll help you," Andre said firmly. Steel rang in his voice, a tone I hadn't heard from him before. "We will destroy him. We will burn his reputation to the ground." He grabbed his phone to make the first call to an old contact at a competing regional newspaper, the only major publication not controlled by Elijah Hayes. But before he could dial the number, a notification popped up on his smartphone screen with a loud ping. "Urgent news," from the main city portal. Andre stopped mid-motion. He looked at the screen, then silently turned the phone toward me. The screen displayed a large, glossy photograph. Darius and Simone. They stood embracing in front of the Hayes Family Foods logo, smiling brilliantly. Both were beaming with happiness, looking like the perfect couple. And beneath the photo was a headline in bold black type. "Love triumphs. Hayes Family Foods announces new director Darius Vance following annulment of marriage to vengeful bride." Andre clicked the link. The article opened instantly, taking up the whole screen. It wasn't just news. It was a verdict delivered and executed in front of the entire city. I read, and the words blurred before my eyes, then gathered again into ugly, venomous sentences. The text was written smoothly, professionally, with cleverly placed emphasis on pity and sympathy for everyone except me. The tragic love story that was nearly destroyed by a moment of weakness and female jealousy, the article proclaimed in its opening paragraph. As our portal learned, the decision to annul the marriage between Darius Vance and Nia Hayes was mutual and made hours before the ceremony. However, Nia Hayes, unable to cope with the bitter truth that her fiancé's heart belonged to another, staged a disgraceful scene at the wedding, attempting to slander not only her former beloved, but her own family out of spite. Andre read the excerpts aloud, his voice devoid of all emotion, which made the words cut even deeper. In an exclusive interview with our correspondent, the heartbroken but strong-willed Simone Hayes, who is now recovering from a nervous breakdown caused by her sister's actions, and her faithful beloved Darius Vance shared their story. He quoted Darius from the article. "We loved each other for 10 years, but duty to the family and respect for my older sister prevented us from being together earlier. When Nia finally learned the truth, we agreed to part as friends. I don't know what came over her at the wedding. Perhaps the pain was too much. The story about the debt was a complete fabrication. The ranting of a jealous, resentful woman who couldn't accept reality." Then more followed. The article cited sources close to the family, probably my father's PR team, who claimed I had always been difficult, withdrawn, and envious of my brighter, more outgoing sister. My question to my father at the wedding was presented as a premeditated, vengeful act aimed at destroying the family business out of personal spite because I had been rejected. "They're not just defending themselves," Andre said, putting down the phone. His face was grim. "They're attacking. They're creating an image of you, the crazy, vengeful, jealous old maid who tried to ruin her sister's happiness." He looked at me. "And they did it in one night. Fast, professional. Your father didn't waste any time. He's already won the first round in the court of public opinion." I was silent. I felt myself being slowly encased in concrete. I hadn't just been kicked out and disinherited, I was being erased, and an ugly, unrecognizable caricature was being painted in my place. Now, to the whole city, I was not the victim of betrayal. I was the villain of the piece. I returned to Vivian's house devastated. Her aunt had already read everything online. She just shook her head slowly as I walked in. "That's his style," she said. "First destroy the reputation, isolate the target, and then you can do anything you want with the person. No one will believe them anyway. The whole city is already talking about you, Nia, and it's not good." I felt that pressure the very next day. I needed to go to the drugstore for a painkiller. My head was splitting from the tension. I pulled the hood of an old jacket Vivian gave me over my head and went outside. I ran into Ms. Davis, an old neighbor from the apartment building where I grew up. Ms. Davis always smiled kindly and asked about my work. Seeing me now, Ms. Davis froze for a second. Her face stretched into a look of fear and distaste. She pretended not to see me and sharply crossed to the other side of the street, almost getting hit by a car in her haste to avoid me. At the drugstore, the young pharmacist, who just a week ago had admired me and asked about the wedding preparations, served me with an icy face, not saying a word, and slammed the change on the counter without looking at me. People stared at me from everywhere, from the windows of houses, from passing cars. I heard fragments of phrases whispered behind my back. "That Hayes girl. What a disgrace. Tried to destroy her own sister. Crazy jealousy." I was not just an outcast, I had become a leper in my own city. The social pressure was almost physically palpable. It weighed on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. That evening, I was back in Andre's basement office. The air was thick with smoke. "The ledger is good," Andre said, pacing nervously in his cramped space. "It proves the fraud, but it's not enough now, not after that article. They've poisoned public opinion against you. If we come out with those records now, everyone will say it's part of your revenge campaign, that you forged your mother's handwriting to destroy your father and sister because you lost your boyfriend. We need something else. Something undeniable." He stopped pacing. "We need proof that Simone and Darius were in on it with your father, that they knew about the spoiled donations, that this wasn't just Elijah's game but a family conspiracy." I sat on the shaky stool, staring blankly at his computer screen where that same photograph still hung. The happy, radiant faces of the victors, Darius, Simone. My gaze automatically skimmed over their clothes, their perfect hairstyles, and suddenly, it caught on something. Something glittering on Simone's neck in the photo. I leaned in closer to the screen. Andre noticed my tense gaze. "What is it? Do you see something?" "Zoom in on the photo," I requested, my voice hoarse. "On Simone." With a few clicks of the mouse, Andre magnified the image. Now Simone's neck and chest were visible in full detail. She was wearing a necklace, a delicate gold chain with 3 large dark blue stones surrounded by a scattering of tiny diamonds, sapphires. I stared at the necklace, and a glacial chill slowly began to rise from my stomach to my throat. I knew that piece. Every facet, every curve of the setting. I had seen it hundreds of times. That's impossible," I whispered. It wasn't just anger that seized me. It was a cold, sticky horror. I jumped up, overturning the chair with a crash. "I have to go," I blurted to a stunned Andre, grabbing my coat and running out of the basement without hearing his questions. I was almost running through the evening streets. One thought hammered in my head, one image. That necklace. I burst into Vivian's house like a whirlwind. My aunt was reading in an armchair. She looked up at me in surprise. "Aunt Vivian," I gasped for breath. "My mother's necklace, her main piece, the sapphires. Do you remember it?" "Of course I remember," Vivian replied slowly, putting down her book and taking off her reading glasses. "The antique French work, deep cornflower blue sapphires. Grandmother called them widow's tears. Why?" "It's on Simone," I exhaled. "In that photo online, on her, around her neck." Vivian's face turned to stone. She slowly rose from the armchair. "Show me." With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, found the article again, and handed it to my aunt, zoomed in on the necklace. Vivian took the phone, holding it close to her eyes. For a few seconds, she stared at the screen in silence. When she lowered the phone, her face was gray. "Yes, it's it. There's no doubt." "But how?" I whispered. "Where did she get it? Father would never have let her take Mom's things. Never. He locked her room after she died." "He didn't allow it," Vivian said quietly. Her voice was full of a strange, terrifying certainty. "Because he didn't even know where it was." I stared at her, not understanding. "That necklace, Nia," Vivian continued, looking me straight in the eye, and there was an abyss in her gaze. "Her most treasured piece. It went missing from her jewelry box on the day she died." My legs buckled and I sank into a chair. I couldn't breathe. "On that very day," Vivian finished, her words falling into the silence like stones into a deep well. 10 years ago, the very day Darius Vance first crossed the threshold of your factory, and the very day he now tells everyone his secret love for Simone began." Vivian's words hung in the air. The day of death, the day Darius appeared, the day the secret love began, and the day the necklace vanished. 3 points that suddenly connected into one ugly, sickening line. This was no longer just betrayal or humiliation. This was a nauseating, sticky web of lies woven over 10 years. Their love wasn't just a secret. It was a conspiracy, a plot that began with theft on a deathbed. They didn't just steal a necklace. They stole the last valuable item belonging to a dying woman, my mother, and then built their relationship on that foundation. Simone had taken it while our mother lay dying. I stood up. My head was clearer than ever. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, ringing fury that felt like armor. "I need to go back there," I said, staring into the distance, past the walls of the house. "Where, Nia?" Vivian asked. "To her apartment, the sanctuary. There must be something else. She couldn't have left only the ledger. That was for business. This is personal." Vivian nodded silently, understanding everything without words. I took the bus across the city again, back to the Riverbend district. This time, I didn't look out the window at the city that hated me. I looked inside myself, trying to piece together the scattered fragments of memories from that day 10 years ago. I remembered it vaguely, through a haze of grief. I was 25. I was at work when my father called, his voice tight, saying Mother was having heart trouble again. Then the second call, an hour later. She was gone. The official cause was a massive heart attack. It all happened very quickly. I remembered rushing home, my father's distraught face, Simone sobbing loudly on his shoulder. I barely knew Darius then. He was just the new guy in the logistics department who had started that week. No one suspected anything. I stood before the door of apartment number 24 again. I turned the old key in the lock again. I entered the same stale air, the same frozen silence of the past. But now I was looking at everything through different eyes. I wasn't looking for business evidence. I was looking for a message from the dead. I methodically searched every inch of the small studio. I took every book off the shelves, shaking them out, flipping through all the pages, looking for a note, a letter, anything. Nothing. I checked all the pockets in my mother's dresses hanging in the closet. Empty. I sat on the sofa, feeling despair begin to creep in again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the ledger was all there was. My gaze fell on my mother's old mid-season coat, hanging on a hook by the door. Simple, gray wool, unremarkable. She wore it constantly in the last months of her life. I walked up to it. I ran my hand over the coarse wool fabric. I put my hands into the pockets. Empty. I was about to walk away, but something made me stop. Intuition? A memory? I felt the lining of the coat again. On the left side, near the chest, the fabric felt slightly denser, thicker than elsewhere. I pressed the spot again. There was something there. Beneath the smooth silk lining was something hard, rectangular, hidden. My heart began to pound faster. I snatched the small kitchen knife from the table and, trying not to damage what was inside, carefully slit the lining along the seam. The silk fabric parted, and a small, plump notebook in a worn black leather cover fell into my hand. A diary. I held it, my hands shaking so hard I could barely open it. I sat down at the desk under the lamp and opened the first page. My mother's handwriting. The same neat, tiny script as in the ledger, but here the letters were more alive, hurried, more emotional. This was the journal of her last months, and as I read, it began to reveal the entire horrible truth that I was only beginning to comprehend. August 15th. Elijah is furious again. Simone's bills from Miami came in. They are astronomical. He yelled that she would ruin him, but I saw that he was angry at himself for not being able to deny her anything. He's ready to do anything, to preserve his little princess's reputation. He will sacrifice the company before he sacrifices her image. I flipped further. The pages flew by, and each one was like a physical blow. September 5th. I think Elijah found a solution. He took us out to dinner with that new logistics man, Darius Vance, a slippery type, too smooth. He stares at Simone constantly when he thinks no one is looking. And Simone, she plays with him like a cat with a mouse. All evening, Elijah praised Nia to him, talking about how reliable and smart she is. What a wonderful wife she would be. I understood his plan instantly. He wants to sell one daughter to save the other. He wants to marry Nia off to this man to bind him to the family, to cover Simone's debts. God, the shame of it. September 22nd. Today, I accidentally overheard Elijah and Simone talking in his office. The door was ajar. I thought it was about the debts again, but it was far worse. Simone was laughing. Laughing! She said, "Dad, it's genius. Why should we log the spoiled goods as waste and lose money when we can donate them? We'll get tax breaks and the reputation of philanthropists. No one checks donations anyway." It was her idea. Hers. My daughter invented a way to poison orphans with spoiled stew to pay for her dresses. I walked into the office, told them it was monstrous. Elijah turned pale, told me not to meddle, that I didn't understand business. And Simone. She looked at me with cold eyes and laughed in my face, said I was naive and didn't understand the modern world. I closed my eyes. It was hard to breathe. So these weren't just my father's schemes, it was their joint venture, a collaboration between father and favored daughter, born of greed and cynicism. I forced myself to read on. The final, fatal date was approaching. The entries became shorter, more anxious, written in a shaky hand. October 10th. I can't watch this anymore. I can't live in the same house as these people. I tried to talk to Elijah again today. I told him it has to stop. He grabbed my arm, hurt me. He said if I told anyone a single word, he'd lock me up in a mental facility. Said I had a bad heart and was hallucinating, that no one would believe a sick old woman over him. October 13th. Today, I found my sapphire necklace in Simone's jewelry box, the widow's tears. She just took it from my room. When I confronted her and asked her why, she just shrugged and answered, "I need it more, Mom. Darius likes expensive things. You don't wear it anyway. I realized then that she would stop at nothing. She has no conscience left. And then, the last entry, written on the day she died. The handwriting was barely legible, hurried, terrified. October 15th. That's it. I can't be silent anymore. I will stop this. This morning, I told Simone that if she and Elijah didn't confess everything and stop this donation scam by tonight, I would go to the police tomorrow morning. I showed her copies of some pages from my ledger so she knows I'm serious. She should have been terrified, remorseful. But she was so calm, too calm. It frightened me more than her anger. She said, "Fine, Mom, let's talk tonight. I'll come to your room after dinner and we'll settle this." She's coming tonight. She'll be here soon. Beneath these words was the last line, written in a scrawl. She's coming. I don't know why, but I'm scared. The diary ended there. I sat motionless, staring at those final words. I'm scared. So that's what happened. My mother gave them an ultimatum. She threatened to expose them, and they answered it. Her heart attack was no accident. She knew they were coming for her. I was about to close the diary, my heart filled with horror, when I noticed something tucked into a small pocket on the inside of the back cover. I carefully pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, folded into quarters. I unfolded it. It was a pharmacy receipt. The date was October 13th, 2 days before her death. It was for a list of medications. Among them was the name of a powerful heart drug that my mother had been taking for years to manage her condition. And at the bottom of the receipt, beneath the list of medications, was a short note written in my mother's hand, a few words scrawled as if in haste. Simone offered to pick up my new prescription today, said I shouldn't bother going out. I don't know why, but I'm afraid. I hid this receipt. I sat staring at the pharmacy receipt, a small yellowed piece of paper, but in my hands it felt as heavy as a tombstone. Everything added up. The threat to go to the police, Simone's strange, frightening calmness, her sudden desire to help and pick up the medication upon which my mother's life depended. My mother's heart attack was no accident. At best, it was criminal negligence. Simone withheld the vital pills when the attack started. At worst, she substituted them, gave her something else to trigger it. It was murder. Cold, calculated murder committed by the hands of a daughter to protect her lifestyle and her father's business. The fury I had felt before was nothing compared to what I felt now. This was something else. A cold, calm, absolute realization that I was dealing with monsters, and I had to stop them. Not for revenge, but for justice. For my mother, whose last frightened whisper I now held in my hands. I carefully folded the receipt, placed it back in the diary, and put the diary into my bag along with the ledger. I left the apartment, locking the door behind me. Now I knew what to do. I arrived at Andre's basement late that evening. He was still at his computer, surrounded by a cloud of tobacco smoke. Seeing me, he jumped up. "Nia, where have you been? I was worried." "I found something else," I said quietly, placing my mother's diary on the desk in front of him. He picked it up and began to read. I sat silently opposite him, watching him. I saw the cynical smirk slowly slide off his face. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. I saw how his eyes darkened with horror as he turned the pages. When he reached the last page and read the note on the pharmacy receipt, he put the diary down as if it burned his hands. He was silent for a long time, staring into space. This changes everything," he finally said in a muffled voice. "This is no longer just fraud and theft. It's murder," I finished for him. "Yes," he nodded grimly. "It's murder." He stood up and began to pace his small room. "We have to go to the police immediately. The district attorney's office. We have proof now." "Useless," I replied calmly. "Think, Andre. Who are we going to complain to? The city police chief is my father's best friend. They go golfing together every Sunday. The state prosecutor owes his appointment to Elijah's campaign donations. They won't even let us through the door with this. And if they do, this diary will get lost in the evidence room the same day, and you and I will be charged with slander and attempting to damage the honest name of a respected man." Andre stopped pacing. He knew I was right. In this city, my father wasn't just a businessman, he was the law. Then what? What do we do? Helplessness rang in his voice. "We need them to confess themselves," I said. "Publicly. We need a voluntary admission of guilt that cannot be buried." Andre looked at me with bewilderment. "Confess? Nia, these people will never confess to anything. They would sooner kill again to hide the truth." "Then we have to corner them," I said, a hardened look appearing on my face that Andre had never seen before. "We have to create a situation where silence is scarier for them than a confession, where they have no escape route." We spent the entire next week developing a plan. It had to be perfect, and my father, Simone, and Darius unknowingly handed us the perfect weapon. City posters and news portals were plastered with announcements for the city's main social event of the year, the annual Founders Gala, and the guest of honor was to be Elijah Hayes. As part of a massive campaign to clean up the family's image after the wedding scandal, he was making a powerful public relations move. He was not only the main sponsor of the event, but was also scheduled to receive an honorary award for his contribution to the city's development and the preservation of family values. During his acceptance speech, he planned to officially announce Darius Vance as his successor and the new CEO of the factory. This was to be his complete and final victory, a triumphant ball where they would dance on the grave of my reputation. "This is our stage," Andre said, showing me the poster on his wall. "We couldn't have picked a better place. The entire city elite, all the press, live television. If we're going to strike, it has to be there, live." "But how do we make them talk in front of everyone?" I asked. "We have to frighten them first," Andre said. "Make them believe we know everything and are ready to tell. They have to panic, and a person in a panic makes mistakes." I understood what I had to do. I knew the weak link in their chain, Calvin. The next day, I waited for him outside the factory gate after his shift. I knew he always walked the same route home through the old park to save bus fare. I simply stepped out from behind a tree to meet him on the path. Seeing me, Calvin flinched violently and paled. He tried to walk around me, but I blocked his path. "Don't be afraid, Mr. Jasper," I said softly, my voice calm. "I don't hold a grudge against you for the other day." He looked at me in surprise, wary. "I understand everything," I continued, looking him directly in the eyes. "You have a family, obligations, a sick wife. I might have done the same thing in your place to protect mine. I didn't come here to accuse you. I came to tell you that everything is fine." He frowned distrustfully, not understanding what I was getting at. I found my mother's old diary," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but there was no deceit in it. "I read it, and I understood a lot. I understood why everything happened the way it did, her last days. There are so many details in the diary that explain everything about the donations and the disposals. It's all clear to me now." I spoke vaguely on purpose, without specifying any details. I was dropping bait. "I just wanted you to know that I'm not angry with you," I finished. "Goodbye, Calvin." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the park in complete confusion and rapidly rising fear. I had no doubt what he would do. A person living in fear, who knows he's complicit in a crime, always runs to their master when danger approaches. I was right. Andre, using old contacts in the telecom company, had a friendly technician trace the calls from Calvin's number. An hour after my conversation with him, Calvin made one single call, to Elijah Hayes. The conversation was short, less than a minute. The trap had sprung. Now all we had to do was wait. We didn't have to wait long. That same evening, as I sat with Vivian in her kitchen, there was a knock on the door. Loud, insistent, almost frantic. Vivian went to open it. I heard my aunt's surprised exclamation of, "You!" and then Darius's voice, tight with tension. "What do you want here, Vance? Get out," Vivian said firmly. "I need to talk to Nia," he replied brazenly, pushing past her. "I know she's here." He shoved the older woman aside and entered the house. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw me. His face held a mixture of anger, fear, and some sort of false, brittle confidence. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his tie was loosened, and he looked sweaty. "Nia, we need to talk," he said, trying to keep his tone businesslike but failing. "Alone." "Speak here," I said calmly, not getting up. "Vivian is my family. I have no secrets from her." Darius cut me off, flustered for a moment, but quickly composed himself. He walked to the table and placed an expensive leather briefcase on it. He clicked the latches open and lifted the lid. The briefcase was packed tight with stacks of $100 bills. "There's $250,000 here," he said, his voice tight. "Cash, untraceable." I looked at the money, then at him. "If it's not enough, tell me how much you want," he said desperately. "Name your price, Nia." I slowly rose from my chair. "The price for what, Darius?" He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "For the diary. For your mother's diary. Let's end this circus. You take the money, you leave the city, you start a new life somewhere else, and we all just forget about this. We can all walk away from this without any more damage." I looked at his scared face, at the pile of cash, at his trembling hands. They were terrified. They believed I knew everything and had come to bargain. They thought everything could be bought. I looked him straight in the eyes. "Get out," I said quietly and distinctly. He was taken aback. "Nia, don't be a fool. This is a lot of money. This is your only chance. Think about it." "I said get out," I repeated, my voice colder. "Just get out of this house." He stood there for a moment, indecisive. "And tell Elijah and Simone," I added, pausing for effect, "that I'll see them at the gala." Darius's face twisted in horror. He understood. The negotiation had failed. The threat was real. He snapped the briefcase shut, grabbed it, and throwing me a look full of pure hatred and panic, bolted out of the house. I remained standing in the middle of the kitchen. The trap was set, and they, scared to death, were walking right into it. The days remaining until the gala passed in a haze of quiet, tense anticipation. Nia and Andre worked out every detail of their plan. Andre arranged for his old friend Malcolm, a reporter from a regional newspaper in a neighboring state, the only major publication not controlled by Elijah Hayes, to come to the gala posing as an ordinary guest. Vivian, using her status as a founding family member, which Elijah couldn't easily revoke without scandal, easily secured 3 invitations, one for herself, one for Nia, and one for her friend from out of state, Mr. Malcolm. Everything was ready, and then the evening came. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel sparkled. It was even grander than the wedding venue. Huge crystal chandeliers reflected in the gleaming, polished floor, flooding everything with dazzling, almost blinding light. A large string orchestra played classical music from a dais. Servers in white gloves carried silver trays of champagne and elaborate canapes. The air buzzed with hundreds of voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The entire city elite was here. The mayor, senators, bankers, industrialists, their wives dripping in diamonds and designer evening gowns. It was a parade of power and hypocrisy, and I, walking into the room on Vivian's arm, felt as if I had entered a viper pit disguised as a paradise. I wore a simple black dress, long, severe, high-necked, without a single piece of jewelry. It was the complete opposite of my wedding dress and the bright, loud gowns of the other women. I looked like a shadow, or perhaps a judge. Next to me, Vivian, in her old-fashioned but elegant dark velvet dress, looked like a queen in exile returning for her throne. At the entrance, 2 security guards in strict suits, clearly briefed about me, tried to stop us. "Pardon me, Miss Hayes," one of them began, stepping in front of me. "Mr. Hayes has indicated—" But Vivian didn't even slow her step. She measured the guard with an icy stare that could freeze water. "This is my guest, young man," she said imperiously. "Are you telling me I cannot bring a guest to the Founders' Gala? Is that the official policy tonight?" The guard deflated. He recognized Vivian Hayes. Arguing with the matriarch, even an estranged one, here in front of everyone was tantamount to career suicide. He silently stepped aside. We walked into the ballroom. Andre and Malcolm were already there, sitting at an inconspicuous table in the corner, with a clear view of the stage. Andre caught my eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. We were on. The center of attention, of course, was my family. Elijah, in a flawless, tailored tuxedo, stood near the stage surrounded by the mayor and the city's most influential people, accepting congratulations, laughing, shaking hands. He was in his element, the powerful, confident master of his universe. Darius, the loyal heir apparent, stood nearby, smiling respectfully, playing his part, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. And Simone. Simone was the star of the evening. She wore a luxurious, gold-embroidered gown that shimmered with every move, with an elaborate updo. And there, on her neck, glittering under the chandeliers, was the necklace. My mother's sapphires. The widow's tears. She was laughing the loudest, drinking glass after glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. But in her eyes, even from a distance, I noticed a feverish, anxious glint. She was manic. They saw me. All three of them, almost simultaneously. The smile on Elijah's face froze for a fraction of a second before he forced it back on. Darius tensed visibly, his eyes darting around. And Simone. Simone turned and shot me a look full of such pure hatred and poorly concealed fear that it was almost palpable. The ceremony began. The host spent a long time complimenting Elijah Hayes, listing his contributions to the city, his charities, his business acumen. Then the mayor stepped onto the stage and, to thunderous applause, presented him with a heavy crystal statuette, the Family Legacy Award. Elijah approached the microphone, the statuette gleaming in his hands. The room quieted respectfully. "My dear friends," he began in his well-trained, confident voice that filled the hall. "It is a tremendous honor for me to stand here today. But this award is not just mine. It belongs to my entire family, a family for whom concepts like honesty, integrity, and responsibility to the community have always been, and always will be, paramount. These are the values I inherited from my parents, and which I have striven to pass on to my children." That was my cue. I slowly walked forward. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked straight across the room between the tables toward the stage. People parted, watching me with surprise, confusion, and judgment. The black dress, the serious face. I was an anomaly in this sea of celebration. The music faded as the orchestra saw me. A hush fell over the room, rippling outward from my path. Elijah on the stage faltered mid-sentence. He saw me approaching, and cold, murderous anger flashed in his eyes. But he was a professional. He pretended nothing was happening, cleared his throat, and continued his speech, talking about the future. Simone was not a professional. Seeing me walking straight toward them, like a ghost from the past they thought they had buried, she panicked. Alcohol and fear did their work. She broke away from the group she was standing with near the stage. She took a few quick steps toward me, intercepting me at the very edge of the stage platform. Her face was contorted with malice and terror. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, loud enough only for us to hear. "Do you think you can ruin everything again? Get out. This evening is ours. Darius is mine. The factory is mine. You lost." She was so close that I could smell the champagne and fear on her breath. I didn't look away. I looked at my sister calmly, almost pityingly. And then I lowered my gaze to her neck, to the sapphires sparkling there, innocent and beautiful. "The necklace is yours too?" I asked quietly but clearly. "Or did you just take it after you switched her pills?" Time stopped. Color slowly drained from Simone's face. It turned white as the tablecloths, then a sickly gray. Her eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on my face. Her breath caught in her throat in an audible gasp. My words, though spoken quietly, seemed to echo in the sudden, absolute silence of the hall. The applause that had begun to swell at the end of Elijah's speech choked off instantly. Everyone in the front rows, the mayor, the senators, their wives, saw it. They saw the confrontation. They saw Simone's reaction. Simone slowly turned her head toward the stage, where her father, interrupting his speech mid-word, was looking down at us with icy fury and panic. She sought salvation from him, her face twisted into a childish, desperate grimace for help. "Daddy!" she screamed across the silent hall, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek that made people flinch. "Daddy, tell her she's lying! Tell all of them! Stop her!" Elijah Hayes stood in the spotlight, holding his award for family values. His flawless reputation, his triumph, his entire world was crumbling before the eyes of the city's elite. He looked at his sobbing, panicking daughter who was about to expose everything, and in that split second, he made his choice. The only choice a man like him could make. He leaned into the microphone. His voice was cold, lifeless, and deafeningly loud in the silence. "Security, please escort my daughter from the hall. She is unwell. She is having an episode." Simone froze. She stared at her father, unable to believe her ears. He hadn't protected her. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't saved her. He had just publicly disowned her, declared her hysterical, thrown her away like a broken toy to save himself. Just as he had thrown me away. "Unwell," she whispered, the word barely audible. And then, a terrifying, chilling realization dawned on her face. Her gaze darted from her father, the man who had just betrayed her, to me, the sister she had betrayed. Her lips trembled. The dam broke. "It was you!" Simone screamed, turning back to her father, her voice raw with agony. "You did this! You made me!" Simone's words were not merely spoken. They were vomited forth. In the dead silence of the hall, they cut through the air like a scalpel. The security guards, who had started toward her, hesitated, awaiting a new command in light of this outburst. Elijah stood on the stage, petrified. His face, triumphant just a minute ago, turned into a gray mask of terror. Simone recoiled from him as if he were the devil himself. She stumbled back a few steps away from the stage, toward the center of the room. She turned, looking wildly at the crowd, at the exit, and then she practically ran, tripping over the hem of her luxurious gold gown. It was a flight from her father, from me, from the hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her with stunned, horrified curiosity. And at that moment, the paralysis broke. Everyone moved. Elijah, snapping out of his shock, realized the danger. He quickly stepped off the stage, abandoning his award. He couldn't let her escape in this state. He couldn't let her keep talking. He rushed after her. Darius, pale as death, realizing that his brilliant future as CEO had just vanished like smoke, instinctively followed his patron, looking for someone to tell him what to do. I moved after them calmly, without rushing. I knew this wasn't the end yet. This was the finale, and I had to play my part to the last line. Behind me, like shadows, slid Andre, and next to him Malcolm, the reporter. Their smartphones were already held high, recording everything. The small red recording lights glowed in the dim light. They were predators who had finally smelled blood. We emerged into the massive, marble-paneled lobby of the hotel. The echo of our footsteps and Simone's sobs boomed under the high arches. Guests spilled out from the ballroom behind us, a wave of murmurs and gasps, but they kept their distance, forming a living semicircle at the entrance to the lobby. No one wanted to miss the climax of this real-life drama. Simone reached a massive marble column in the center of the lobby and stopped, pressing her back against it as if cornered. She was trapped. Elijah, Darius, and I surrounded her, forming a loose semicircle. "Stop the hysterics, Simone," Elijah hissed, approaching her, trying to grab her arm to pull her away. "You don't understand what you're doing. Shut up." "I?" she shrieked, yanking her arm away violently. "It was me? You just sacrificed me in front of the whole city. You called me crazy." She turned to me, madness and hatred mingled with terrifying fear in her tear-streaked eyes. "You won't prove anything!" she screamed at me, her voice cracking. "Nothing! You have nothing but your sick fantasies. No one will believe you." I silently took a step forward. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pulled 2 items from my small black clutch bag. The plump notebook in the old, worn leather cover, and the small, yellowed pharmacy receipt. I didn't open them. I didn't read from them. I simply held them in my hand, displaying them like irrefutable artifacts of truth. "I don't need to prove anything, Simone," I said quietly. "You've already confessed everything. Your face right now says more than any proof ever could." Darius saw the diary. He recognized it instantly. He had seen that same notebook in my hands on the night he came to my aunt's house to bargain, and he realized with sickening clarity that the game was utterly and completely over. All his ambitions, his CEO chair, his future, his freedom, all of it was in that little notebook I held, and the cowardly, selfish instinct for self-preservation took over, overriding everything else. He took a step sideways, physically separating himself from Elijah and Simone, creating distance. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, as if surrendering to an invisible police force. "I have nothing to do with this," he shouted quickly, his voice shrill, addressing me, Elijah, and the invisible crowd of witnesses behind us. "I didn't know anything. I swear. I was just covering their family debts like I was told. Mr. Hayes said they were having temporary difficulties. I knew nothing about her mother, about the medicine, about any murder. This is the first I've heard of it. I am a victim of their schemes too." It was betrayal. Instant, total, and vile. He threw them under the bus without a second thought to try and save his own skin. Elijah looked at him with withering contempt, a look that would have killed a lesser man. But he had no time for Darius now. All his attention, all his terror, was focused on the diary in my hands. That diary was a bomb that was about to explode his entire life, his entire empire built on lies and images, and at that moment, his sanity broke. The cool, calculating businessman vanished. Only one instinct remained: destroy the threat. He made a fatal mistake. He lunged forward, not at me, but at the diary. He reached out with desperate hands, trying to snatch, to claw the evidence from my grasp, to destroy it. But Simone stood in his way. In this last, decisive moment, seeing her father not as the omnipotent patriarch who could fix everything, but as a terrified old man who had first disowned her and was now trying to steal a book like a petty thief, something in her snapped. She understood everything. Everyone had betrayed her. Her father, her lover. And her last chance for salvation, her only hope of not going down alone, was to drown the one who was dragging her down. She violently shoved her father. Elijah, not expecting resistance from his own daughter, stumbled backward. He lost his balance on the polished marble floor and hit the column hard with his shoulder. Simone didn't look at him. She turned to me. Her face was wet with tears, her makeup streaked into a grotesque mask. She looked like a deranged actress in the finale of a tragedy. "It was him!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her father, her voice echoing through the lobby. "He told me to. He planned everything. He said Mom was weak, that her heart would kill her soon anyway. He said she was in our way, in the way of the business, in the way of our future. He said I was the future of this family, and she was the past dragging us back." She was gasping for air between sobs, the words bursting forth like a dam breaking after 10 years of silence. "The pills! He said we just had to help her, to speed it up so she wouldn't suffer. He said no one would ever find out. He forced me, Nia. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to." It was a full, unconditional confession. Theft, conspiracy, murder, and all of it under the glittering lights of the lobby chandeliers, before the eyes of the city's shocked elite peeking from the ballroom, and under the merciless, unblinking gaze of 2 recording smartphones held by Andre and Malcolm. At that moment, the main doors of the lobby burst open. People in police uniforms quickly entered, their radios crackling. Andre, seeing that the climax was near, had managed to call his contact in the precinct minutes ago, telling them a murder confession was happening live at the Gala. Chaos erupted. Camera flashes went off from the press who had been waiting outside. Malcolm had pulled out his professional camera and was snapping rapidly. The flashes flickered, snatching faces contorted with horror, rage, and despair from the dim light. Police officers pushed through the stunned guests, heading straight for our group by the column. "Elijah Hayes," a sergeant announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder." "Simone Hayes, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder." "Darius Vance, you are under arrest on suspicion of accessory to murder and fraud." Elijah was silent. He let them cuff him without resistance. He stared into space, his face utterly impassive, a mask of stone. He knew he had lost everything. Simone was sobbing uncontrollably, screaming that she was innocent, that her father made her do it, clinging to the officers' arms as they tried to restrain her. Darius was babbling, muttering something about cooperating fully with the investigation, about telling everything he knew, trying to cut a deal before he even got to the station. Handcuffs clicked on their wrists. One by one, they were led through the crowd of stunned, silent guests toward the exit. past the cameras, out into the night. The ball of triumph had turned into a public execution of a legacy. The Hayes family empire was destroyed in one evening, publicly and irreversibly. I stood motionless in the center of the lobby, watching them go. I was still clutching the diary and the ledger to my chest like a shield. Vivian walked up to me out of the crowd and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "It's over, child," she said softly. I looked up at her. There was neither joy nor malice in my eyes, only enormous, all-consuming exhaustion. "No," I said quietly. "It's only just beginning." 6 months later. The morning was cold but sunny. The air smelled of metal, wet concrete, and fresh paint. I stood on the metal loading dock, looking down at the bustling grounds of the factory. After the sensational court case that rocked the entire nation, the company had been on the brink of total bankruptcy. The scandal was immense. Elijah Hayes and Simone were convicted. Elijah received a life sentence for organizing the murder and decades of fraud. Simone, due to her cooperation and testimony against her father, received 25 years. Darius, as a key witness who provided evidence of the financial fraud, got off with a heavy fine and 5 years of probation and immediately disappeared from the city, his reputation shattered. I, as the only untainted heir and with Vivian's support, was appointed external administrator of the company by the court. It was a heavy, nearly impossible task to resurrect the business from the ashes of such a scandal, to regain the trust of suppliers, customers, and employees. But I succeeded. Vivian stood beside me on the dock. She was now my right hand, my advisor, my true family. "We're starting the main conveyor belt in 10 minutes, Vivian said, checking her watch and looking down at the workers below. "People are ready to get back to work. They trust you, Nia." "I'm ready too," I smiled. It felt strange to smile, but good. I had sold the small sanctuary apartment near Riverbend. The place that held my mother's pain and secrets had to do some good. With all the proceeds from the sale, and adding a significant portion of my own salary as administrator, I created a charitable foundation named after my mother, the Eleanor Hayes Foundation. The foundation's first and main project was the complete renovation and ongoing support of the very children's home my father and sister had poisoned with spoiled food for years. Now, the foundation ensured they received regular deliveries of the freshest, highest quality products from our factory, honestly donated, not marked as waste. My victory was not in vengeance, it was in the restoration of justice and balance. I looked up at the factory's main building. The huge old letters, Hayes Family Foods, had been taken down weeks ago. In their place, shining in the morning sun, was a new, laconic inscription, Eleanor's Quality Foods. Below us, a loud whistle blew. The massive conveyor belt shuddered and slowly began to crawl forward, carrying the first cans of the new, honest product toward the packaging line. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean morning air. My war was over. My new life was beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it. And so, this complex and dramatic story concludes, my friends. A story about the ultimate betrayal by those who should have loved us most, but at the same time, a story about the incredible strength of one woman who was able to stand alone against everyone and restore justice. I'm sure it left a mark on everyone who listened. And perhaps the main question that remains with all of us after this finale is this: did Nia do the right thing? On the one hand, she exposed thieves, fraudsters, and cold-blooded murderers. She stopped a terrible crime where her father and sister were poisoning the city's most vulnerable, orphans and the elderly, for years to fund their lifestyle. She cleared her mother's name and revived the family business on principles of integrity and honesty. Her victory seems absolute and moral. But on the other hand, the price of that victory was terrible. She personally, meticulously, destroyed her own family. She sent her biological father and sister to prison for decades. Was justice worth such total annihilation? Was there another, perhaps less brutal path she could have taken? Could she have found the strength to simply walk away, or perhaps even forgive them? Or are some crimes, some betrayals, simply unforgivable? What do you think about this? We would really like to hear your opinion in the comments. Perhaps you have questions about the plot. Did something seem incomplete? Are you curious about what happened to other characters, like Calvin or Andre the journalist? Please don't hesitate to write everything that is on your mind in the comments below this video. I will make sure to read all your thoughts. And of course, if this story touched you, if you sympathized with Nia and followed her difficult struggle with bated breath, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Your likes and comments are the best reward for us and the greatest incentive to create new, even more captivating stories for you. All the best to you.